And thank you very much for the invitation to have this presentation with all of you here. And I'm very delighted to see so many familiar faces. And want to just give my warmest regards to all of you, especially to Max here, who's sitting in the front row, just recently retired faculty from Strategic Studies Institute. Max has been to many of my presentations, and I know every time he nods his head, I'm saying something right. So hopefully today will be the same thing as well. So it is exciting to talk about this when the program director approached me for a topic, and I said, why shouldn't I talk about Chinese emerging foreign policy with a new Chinese president now in place? So that certainly is a great topic. And China nowadays is such a factor, a phenomenon, something, anything you name it, that gets into our life, gets in the war college curriculum. And put it this way, no speaker in Bliss Hall at the war college can make a presentation or a talk or whatsoever without touching upon the issue of China in any ways. It's so phenomenal. And certainly China also touches upon many aspects of American life as well. And largely the past several decades through Chinese trade, China-made products that made everyone from people like you to your grandchildren, they all know things are made in China. And of late too, this China-made thing have taken a new kind, air pollution. And we just find out that China-made air pollution have also made its way into the United States as well. So even air pollution here now in the United States is also made in China. It's just how phenomenal. It's just unbelievable. We just don't know what else is made in China is going to come in our way in the near and distant future. It's just so phenomenal. So talking about China, just make it right. And also for people like you, even though most of you have retired, you still pay attention to world politics. That's a great thing with you. And China is a rising power. Certainly, as many people, including myself as well, that this country, this rising China, has the capacity and has the potential to influence the destiny of this great nation, the United States. So we certainly need to pay attention. And Chinese foreign policy I'm going to discuss in my presentation is emerging with a new president in place. And I'm going to kind of explain why some of the emerging patterns, what give rise to this? What are the nature features of this emerging Chinese foreign policy? Why that is the case? And in what ways, especially in a big strategic perspective, this foreign policy matters on the other side and matter to the United States as well. So I'm going to just kind of highlight a few observable emerging patterns and then explain why those patterns are emerging. Okay, that's my presentation. And I understand that there must be a lot of unanswered questions. So I will leave time for you to ask questions, and I will try to entertain your questions as well. Let me start this presentation with a recent conflict or a recent event, a recent incident, whatever you want to put it, in East Asia. Look at this map. This is East Asia Pacific in the blue. Where's the laser? Let me use the laser. This is Pacific Ocean, Japan, Taiwan, China, Southeast Asia, Korea. And recently, something happened there that caught a lot of international attention, and that was China suddenly declared or imposed an air defense identification zone in East Asia. That is the zone marked on the map. Well, with that sudden declaration just about 2 months ago, it generated an outcry in the international community led by the United States. U.S. Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense came in the first order of time, responded with very strong words against the Chinese sudden action. That the United States denounced Chinese unilateral and sudden imposition of an ADIS in East Asia. And the United States would not accept this Chinese declaration and imposition of these ADIS, Air Defense Identification Zone. Very strong words. Well, Japan followed quickly to make this call for China to roll it back. It's simply not acceptable. Stronger than the United States call to just to roll it back, will not accept it. And South Korea, Australia, and the European Union, and some other US-friendly countries and allies also joined the United States to denounce and criticize Chinese move. So that was what happened about 2 months ago. It generated such a stir in that area. Now then begs the question, why is this Chinese declaration of an ADIS in that area so controversial? Okay, and on the surface, those are the kind of a very obvious problems with this Chinese zone here because it overlaps with some of the existing air defense zones in that area. The blue ones, this Japan's air defense identification zone, and the green one is the South Korean one, and this is the Taiwan defense zone, and then this is the Vietnam defense zone. And so China's sudden declaration of this identification zone somehow overlap with these other existing ones. So it's understandable Japan was upset, South Korea was upset, and Taiwan also had its reservation as well. Okay? But then, in addition to the overlapping zones here that affects future air travel in that area, okay, there are territorial disputes in this area as well. The most controversial one is the one between China and Japan. In Japanese, called Senkaku Islands, and the Chinese called the Diaoyu Islands, means fishing islands. Japan and China have been fighting over those islands for decades. And only in recent years, it has taken much more hit, and China and Japan really were coming very close at each other's throat here, with sometimes even close military encounters. Then all of a sudden, this air defense identification zone also cover this disputed territory right here at that corner. And in addition to the disputed territory, in this area, somehow over here, inside the red zone here, there are some undersea deposit of natural resources, gasoline, fossil oil. China has been exploring and pumping gas and oil out of those rigs over here. And it is still a dispute between China and Japan over those oil rigs for years as well. So Chinese zone certainly covers that area as well. And then a larger picture of that if you take a Google map look on this East Asia part of it, you can actually see the topography of the world. The light blue color here indicates the water is not so deep. And then as you go further down outside of this red line here, then water becomes dark blue, indicating very deep water. The light one then is what the international law of the sea calls continental shelf. So China argues that its continent have this continental shelf extending all the way to the edge of this line. And Japan thinks that that area should be divided in half between Japan and China. So at this point, it's not settled. Who should have which piece of it? And whoever gets what piece of it is something, a treasure for future generations to come. So the two nations certainly stand fast to protect, to get what they think they deserve. And at this point, it's not settled. So then China imposed this zone and would like to have its future military airplanes to patrol that area. So that is why it becomes so controversial, just in local sense between China and its maritime neighbors. Now, I'm going to submit to you that controversial as they are and rich as they are, there is still something more important on top of this very obvious conflict. That is China's relations with the United States. In essence, the Chinese ADIS, the imposition of this ADIS, has challenged United States' interest in the Western Pacific. Some of you may come from maybe formerly Air Force officers. You know how you fly in that area. Navy officers, our battleships sail in that area as well. Okay? And all of a sudden, China have that one. And the imposition, the implication is then airplanes or objects, flying objects into that zone should notify China properly. Civilian airplane, for instance. And military airplanes, if you do not notify the Chinese authority, they will scramble jet fighters to contact you and make sure you have no intention to go into Chinese territory. And if you just fly by, they will let you go. But if you have the intent to go into China, then they will make sure that your intent is not hostile. So that kind of a change of status challenged U.S. interest. For well over 60 years after World War II, United States Air Force and Navy have been sailing and flying in that area without such requirements. So the Chinese are putting something new to. So that is, in that sense, it is challenging United States interest. And the other sense is that the imposition of this, as the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense put it, Chinese imposition of these ADIS challenged the regional security order that has been in place since after World War II as well. So put in a bigger strategic sense, okay? Now, as I'm going to talk about the Chinese foreign policy, and as I look at this incident occurring 2 months ago, it is a milestone, to put it this way, in Chinese foreign policy. It is not a turning point, but it's a milestone of something emerging, very important step in emerging new foreign policy, okay? And also, it is a milestone in the United States-China relationship called the power transition. Some of you may have had this from me a few years ago about what the power transition is all about. Now, the power transition, I'm going to give you a little more explanation to it. And this incident put it in that perspective, then it's a very important development in this power transition. I put it this way, it is a very important step in the second stage of the United States-China power transition relationship. That has been going on for the last 30-some years, okay? Now, in order to understand this idea of power transition, I need a little explanation and give you a little theoretical, a little dose of a theory here. Don't be scared about theory. I can explain that to you and help you understand why that is the case, because it's going to help you understand the nature of US-China relationship, okay? Now, the power transition theory is about international relations, international system, and great power relations in this international system. When we talk about international system, we are talking about something abstract, but there are some practical underpinnings to it, okay? Look at the world at any particular time. There are numerous nation states. Some are big, others are small, and there are mediocre ones as well. At any time, there's a tendency for the great powers to get together either single-handedly or collectively to form an international system, okay? And the system is made up of political security economic orders with some of the institutions, trade regimes, security guarantees, and political ideology, rules of the game, values. All of those are the making of these great powers. They put it together, create a kind of international system, and then they derive benefit from there and expect all the states to follow. So then you look at this system in such a way that these great powers form an international system, okay, and they maintain order in this international system. But not every nation in the system is happy with this international order. Some of them have no part in its making. Some of them feel that this international system, rules and laws, work against their national interest. They don't like it. Well, but they are not great powers, and they are not in great number either. And these smaller ones, they could be unhappy, but they really cannot do anything to overthrow this system or go against the wills of these great powers. Okay? So that's the nature of an international system. Now, the system that has something to do with international conflict. Nation states have no authority over them. They go after interest. If they cannot get the interest they want, they sometimes resort to force, the use of force. And the theory goes that if the great powers have firm control of the rules and the laws in this system should be free of great power wars. If the great powers don't have to fight against each other, this system is fine. The smaller conflict here will not rock the boat. That's the theory goes. And small nations, like the small actors, like a terrorist, they can make our life miserable, but they cannot upset the international order. They cannot overthrow it. North Korea, Iran, they make trouble for the great powers, but they cannot overthrow this international order. As long as the great powers stay together, they don't fight, international system will be fine. They can handle those small conflicts here. Well, trouble starts if in this little shaded area, those are by design great powers, just by their natural design. Population, geography, and everything put together, some are just simply bigger than others. But they are not happy. They are not satisfied actors here, but they are backward. They are not powerful. But they are unhappy. But because they're backward and not powerful, they couldn't do much. But if one or several of them, of their national leaders, somehow come to their senses and started to develop their own nation, And then they become more powerful. Economic power drives everything. When they become more powerful, these rising great powers will feel the need and feel the capacity with newfound power. One typical thing among many they would do is try to do something to alter this international order, which they think work against their interest. They are in no part in its making. As soon as these great powers, the rising one, started to do something like that, they bring themselves to challenge these other great powers, eventually the most powerful one. And if they cannot settle their difference peacefully, they settle their problems in battlefield. Throughout history, that has been the case. Rise and fall of great powers, the coming of new international systems, all settled in bloodshed. There's no exception. Okay. Well, just to give you a little chart of economic development here in the last several decades. And you can see this is the United States, which is the most powerful nation economically in the world. And then Japan is the second largest economy. Germany is the third one. And then guess this red line represents China's GDP. Okay, it's economic, measuring its economic development. So from back in the late 70s and early 80s, China was nowhere, just minimal, and started to have its economic reform and development and gradually pick up its development and take off, and then overpass Germany somewhere in the mid-20s, 2000, mid-2000. And then about 2010 and 9, China overpassed Japan to become the second largest economy in the world. So, with the rise of China in economic sense, China also have an overall modernization plan to develop overall China as well. And that triggered something we called power transition between this rising power and the most powerful nation that created this international system and has been maintaining this international system for so long. That issue has come into place. Then the question is there power transition between China and the United States? And I would like to submit to you, my answer is yes. It is largely as a result of Chinese genuine modernization, economic development. 30 years in its making. Now China is rising. China's rise put in the triangle, the pyramid perspective. China used to be a very unhappy great power in the shaded area. When the People's Republic of China was founded back in 1949, the United States did not recognize the Chinese regime in Beijing. For 30 years, China was even not a member of that international system, let alone taking part in making of it. The United States did not recognize China. Most of you still recall this history. We recognized the government in Taiwan. So we did not recognize the PRC for 30 years. So China was an outsider, a disgruntled outsider, great power in a shaded area, seeking the complete destruction of this international system of the United States making. Okay? And China also finds many things work against its interest and under threat all the time as well. But 30 years of economic growth then has given China a lot of newfound power. So now, from the United States perspective, China's threat, this thesis, naturally arise here. That has been a topic, a debate, dominating Washington's policy consideration with respect to China as well as international relations as well. In the previous chart, well, there are so many other great powers. There are India, Japan, Germany, Britain, France, and other great powers, Brazil as well. All of them could be rise and fall, but only China is different from the rest of them. This rising China is different from the rest of them in many aspects, the most important of which is this rising China has the potential to challenge the United States and would seek change in the international system. Now, Japan and Germany can continue to rise, but they are already completely transformed as our allies. Germany and Japan have no intention whatsoever to replace the United States as the leader of this free world, which they are happily part of it. Okay? Russia, its predecessor, the Soviet Union, had tried that before, but communism failed. Russia is still a great power to be reckoned with, but it doesn't have any alternative to offer the world. Okay? So that's Russia. It's going to restore its power, but all it can do. China is different. It thinks it's a very rich heritage, very rich culture, and as the longest civilization, one of the longest civilization. It has many things it thinks it can offer the world as an alternative to the United States international order. So that is what makes this rising China so challenging. And the China threat then becomes such a defining factor influencing US policy consideration. Well, Chinese were very upset about this China threat thesis. And they think that this is a United States prejudice against China. But most of the Chinese counter-arguments are not very effective. For years, many Chinese officials as well as non-official try to come up with something against this China threat, but it has not been effective. And China's threat thesis continue to emerge every other day to influence US and other nations' thinking about China. So about 10 years ago, Chinese leader came up with a new call. And this is Chinese peaceful rise thesis as a counter-argument to the China threat thesis. And what in essence in this Chinese peaceful rise call are the following, a number of points. First, China openly put it that China has no intention to challenge US supremacy. Very significant. The first point, through Chinese president and premier and senior officials. The first item is China has no intention to challenge US supremacy. Second, China does not seek destruction of this international system anymore. Instead, China wants to become part of it. Through its trade, economic reform, and everything, China tries to become part of this international system. So China does not want the destruction of it anymore. The Chinese leaders also put it that way, that as China becomes more developed, it needs more natural resources. China would not swear, would not repeat past mistakes made by past great powers to use force to secure natural resources supply, colonialization, for instance. But instead, we'll go to marketplace to purchase them, so on and so forth. A whole package of these promises. Chinese leaders brought this package to the United States through Chinese president, premier. They speak at Yale, at Harvard, and to US politicians. And ask the United States to give China the chance for a peaceful development. Very significant. Well, 2 years later, the United States responded. United States is certainly not shy to take credit for helping China 30 years ago to get out of its self-imposed isolation. President Nixon went to China, opened up China. US business, investment, stormed China, helped China to do its economic reform. US market was instrumental, very critical for China to sell its products, so China can develop. United States certainly takes credit for doing all of this. Now, China is now much more powerful. United States thinks that instead of taking a free ride for so long, China should do more. We ask China, since you have this goodwill, please help us maintain this international system from which China has benefited tremendously. Become a stakeholder to this international system of our making. That is our call. Now, this exchange between China and the United States about 10 years ago was probably the first time in the history of international relations. Two great powers, one sitting one and one rising one, openly exchange goodwills. One promised not to rock the boat, the other say, welcome on board. Okay, we'll work with you, but help me maintain this international system. A great handshake between two great powers, first time. Very significant. Well, good as it is, a good step in the right direction, we can see that, we can agree. But it doesn't take care of US-China relations for good and forever. There are so many conflicts between these two nations. So many things in disagreement. Very difficult. The two nations have to come back from time to time to reassure each other, to get through whatever difficult problem as they encounter. Just put these problems in perspective, go quickly. The ideological divide, two different governments holding on to different political philosophy, continue to stand in the way between us and China, so that leaders on the two sides don't take each other with good faith. Very difficult. Distrust is the nature. We can't reduce that. It's very difficult. Well, as China grows, it's trade leading the way. It's changing a lot of economic landscape and as well conditioning other nations' policy calculation. Look at the blue ones are the United States trade with Asian nations, and this other one is China's trade with other Asian nations. You can see as China grows, its trade portion with its Asian partners grows exponentially and overtaking the United States for good. So the United States feels that it's being marginalized. China is making all the impact with its substantial, much bigger amount of trade economic relations with these other Asian nations. China conditioned their policy decision making, their calculation. Okay? They have to think twice before they make a decision between China and the United States. So, let alone the imbalanced trade between China and the United States too. Okay. Every now and then, this issue comes up, especially during general election. Every candidate will then start to bash China for its unfair trade with the United States. We lose job that way. Well, of late too, this new thing is that China is the largest foreign government holder of US Treasury bonds. Okay, that's all we know, right? US Treasury bonds is just the same size of the US national, the GDP. Okay, we have the same size, 16 trillion. We have that much debt. A large part of it were held by US corporate and individuals. But there's a good part of it were held by foreign government and foreign banks and foreign individuals. China happens to be the largest one in that piece of the pie. So as China holding that much US Treasury bonds, we somehow feel that China is also holding us hostage in the economic financial sense as well. Well, in addition to these other things, China's military development is also phenomenal. And its acquisition of this aircraft carrier certainly is changing the military balance in the Western Pacific. And if those are not enough, we just take a look at the East Asia landscape here, security landscape. China is the world's perhaps the most continuous nation in the world, unbroken. Even if it was broken, it was put back again. One of the most continuous, oldest ancient civilization in the world. But it's still a very young nation. China has many nation-building business unfinished, both internal as well as external. Just look at around China, there are so many unsettled problems. Some are directly involving the United States and China on our freedom of navigation in the Chinese claimed exclusive economic zone area. And then our commitment to the defense of Taiwan is a direct conflict between us and China. Then we have treaty commitment to Japan and Korea, and we have North Korea problem, and we have in the South China Sea problem. And then inside China, there is a Tibet problem and the Uyghur problem in China's northwest. So as we are talking today, President Obama is meeting with the Dalai Lama, and the Chinese are launching protests, accusing the United States for interfering in Chinese domestic affairs. So that, every time that happens, when the Dalai Lama comes to the United States and we give a presidential meeting to him, it is a test of will between China and the United States. So a lot of issues. All of these things stand in the way. So that handshake 10 years ago is not enough between these two nations to have a lasting cooperative relationship. So with all those problems and the rising China becomes so big, appearing to be bigger and bigger and more difficult to handle, the United States under the Obama administration has adopted a policy called United States strategic rebalancing towards Asia Pacific. Shortly after taking office, the Obama administration launched this campaign or policy initiative, whatever you name it, called the United States Rebalancing towards Asia Pacific. And as I kind of put all the articulation of the policy and also the action taken together, it can somehow summarize a 5R agenda. All start with the R here. The United States would like to rebalance all of this. Okay? And as Secretary Hillary Clinton put it, we can do this right. The emerging Pacific century, as the power shift from the Atlantic to the Pacific, should be America's Pacific century, but not China's. So that's our call, if we do it right. Well, it is against this background the Chinese new president came to power a year ago. And the baton was changed from Mr. Hu to Mr. Xi Jinping. A year ago, the two of them, he serving 10 years, stepped down, handed all his power, political, military, administrative, to his successor, Xi Jinping. That was 10 years old, against the background I have just presented to you, okay? When Xi Jinping took over the helm, he immediately, certainly wasted no time in making his own initiative very quickly. As soon as he took over the party secretary's position, he made this call: I have a dream. Now, this dream, these lines are not very clear. The 2,000 some years of Chinese history, okay? Back then when the Middle Kingdom was first unified, 2021 BC, okay? The Middle Kingdom. China, several times in the 2,000 years, were on top of the world. The most advanced, most powerful nation on earth, several times. But then, in the mid-19th century, the Middle Kingdom fell, corrupted, declined. And then just about that time, the Europeans make their way into Asia, into China, and carved out China. So the Middle Kingdom fell from grace. And ever since then, concerned Chinese, generations of them, all want to try to put this Middle Kingdom back together, restore China's rightful place in the world. That is the most powerful goal for generations of Chinese leaders since then. But they have failed along the way, and Chinese suffer from civil war and other wars as well. And finally, in 1978, China embarked on a true industrialization process, started its true modernization, the process of putting this Middle Kingdom back together, trying to restore China's rightful place in the world. When the new president said he had a dream, in essence, what he's saying is that this dream is within their reach. With Chinese successful economic development in the last 30-some years, the dream of putting China in the rightful place in the world, what they mean is the greatest power, is within their reach. That's what he really meant. And what it means that China's per capita income currently about 100 among 200-some nations, even though its GDP is the second largest in the world, but if you divide that by 1.4 billion Chinese, the per capita income is very low. So the plan is, in the next 30-some years, to bring China's GDP per capita income to among the top 20 in the world. Very ambitious plan. And China will become the next leader in science and technology innovation. And then it will achieve national unity, security, and become a full-fledged great power in all aspects. That is that dream. And he thinks that it is within their reach. Well, to approach this dream, the president has laid out a 4-point agenda. First one is to continue economic reform and China's development. That should be unstoppable. The overarching plan must go. As long as China can continue its economic reform, nobody can bring China down. That is their take. Second, he launched a clean up corruption campaign. Corruption is so bad in China, just like the air pollution. All the Chinese officials are, in some sense, corrupted, and no laws to put them in check. Very bad. People make fun of these Chinese corrupted officials that if you are not corrupted, you cannot become an official in China. Right? And one of those is that many of them having 2 or 3 mistresses. Extramarital affair is commonplace. And if you don't have those, you cannot become an official in China. And when people look at that, they don't say anything bad about him. Say, look at how good he is. He has 4. My Lord, that's the comparison among the Chinese. It's horrible. And some people, even Chinese netizens nowadays, phenomenal in number. 500 million Chinese netizens, bigger than the population of the United States. They make fun in the internet as long as you don't overthrow the government. They say, well, if you line up the Chinese officials and randomly shoot them, you only kill maybe 1 or 2 innocent. But if you shoot them skipping one another, you're going to spare a lot of the corrupt officials. It's just so bad in China, okay? So this new president wants to clean up this party. It's very difficult. He's running this campaign. It's against very strong resistance. He's going to go after some people only to find that it's so tangled, nested with a lot of connections. Some of them coming back to hit himself. Now, as China has no laws and rules, his campaigns are like a political campaign. It's like a power struggle. He used this crackdown of corruption to just get rid of his political opponent. It appears to be like that. Unlike the United States, when we have a corrupted official, the law enforcement, the legal system go after these corrupted officials. President Obama doesn't have to do anything, right? the law will take its own place, right? But in China, there's no law, and the party is above the law. So that makes it so difficult. The Chinese leaders, including himself, have to settle the problem before they can go to the legal system. If they cannot settle the problem, that case will never come to the legal system at all. So that just becomes such a political power struggle up here. It just probably will have no end to it. I myself have seen many. His way predecessor, Chairman Mao, who founded the People's Republic of China, used political means to crack down corruption from time to time. When the movement came, people behaved. When the movement went away, corruption came back. That's always the case. Goes on this cycle, virtuous cycle. But then, in addition, be that as he may, hopefully he can somehow clean up a little bit. Okay. And then he wants to accelerate military modernization. He emphasizes the military part of it as an instrument of statecraft. Very important, heavy emphasis. Okay? And then with all of those, he is pursuing an assertive foreign policy, which is very different from previous Chinese foreign policies, which is downplay significance, hold calmly, observe the situation, don't take lead, don't become assertive. Focus on your own economic development. And he is now doing some very assertive things. The 80s is a perfect example in this sense. So, soon as he took over the Chinese presidency and the chairman of the Chinese Central Military Commission, President Xi Jinping had launched his inspection review of the military units all over China. Just in a year, he has done many visits to all the important military regions and units and give talk to the Chinese military. And he challenged them, okay? What are you here for? You are here to fight wars, and I want you to win. Not just fight wars, and I want you to win as well. That is to rally and mobilize and inspire his troops. So in a year's time, he has visited many of these regions and units, very significant. At the same time, he launched diplomacy. The first one to visit is Russia. Very important to secure the Russian partnership, strategic partnership. The Russians have problem with the United States. So China and Russia are two strange bedfellows. They stick together because they have the United States common problem. So they stick together. So then the Chinese president's first foreign visit is to Russia. Very significant. Look at the United States. Our president's visit, first official visit, it's a very important symbolic act. Traditionally, the first visit goes to Europe. Our president's first official overseas visit goes to Europe. Our Secretary of State first official visit also goes to Europe as well. But Obama and Clinton broke this tradition. Secretary Hillary Clinton's first visit was to Asia. And he said the United States is coming back to Asia. Okay? And President Obama's first presidential visit was also to Asia. Broke the whole tradition. The Chinese president's first visit was to Russia. A very strong political statement to the United States. Don't mess with me. Don't mess with the Russians. Okay? The Russians are tough. In the United States, there is a saying that don't mess with the Texans. In international issues, don't mess with the Russians. They are tough. Okay? They shoot you if you don't listen. And they use nuclear power just like a regular weapon. Yeah, they openly put it that way. So signing up with the Russians make the Chinese feel more secure. And then the president also traveled about 50 nations in just within a year, soliciting all supports all over the place. And then at the Asia Pacific, as a result of the government shutdown, President Obama had to cancel his trip to this Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in Indonesia. So China now stands in center place. And Secretary Kerry, because he's not head of the state, he has to stand here in the corner. How ugly can it be, right? Because of government shutdown, the president have to cancel his very important trip to Indonesia. And in this economic summit, the Chinese president brought billions of investment offers to the table, to these Asian nations, while the United States president was not there. Very, very bad picture. Well, when this Chinese president has basically put all his design in place, he came to the United States now. Very important, the United States. And had a meeting at the Sunnyland resort in California. The two of them had a meeting. Very interesting. Now, what is supposed to be President Obama's personal diplomacy to influence Chinese, but what happened was the Chinese took initiative, probably for the first time in the two nations' relations, because for so long it was the United States that make whatever initiative calls. We define the terms. We call the situation. We define the relationship. We make the rules. We make the act. We push everything. But this is the first time the Chinese make the initiative. He was well prepared to come to this meeting and call for the United States to develop a new type of great power relationship with China. This is the Chinese first foreign policy initiative, a call, foreign policy call, to develop a new type of great power relationship. Okay, the Chinese put it this way: the United States for so long has controlled the right of speech in international arena, and China wants to have a share of it, and probably in the future take it over. And this is the first one. And by making this call, China offers three components to this call. First, the United States and China have conflict, but let's don't fight. Let's talk about it. Okay, let's manage them. So no confrontation. Don't use force. Second, China asked the United States to have mutual respect for each other's core interest. Sounds good. And then the third one is the two nations should strive for win-win situations, work for common interest. Three points call to make up a great power relationship. Should be new in this power transition process between the United States and China. Okay? Now, they look pretty nice. Let me tell you, the devil's in the details. Okay? Because what is core interest in China is very, very fuzzy. And to the United States, our core interests are well respected. All the nations in the world know our core interests. Nobody wants to step on it, right? But China's core interests are not well defined. The most important one, territorial integrity, national unity, the political system as stipulated in China's constitution. Let me tell you what this is. Chinese Communist Party is the party controlling China. And this party put in the Chinese constitution that it is the ruling party for good in the constitution. So if anyone in China or anyone in the United States would talk to the Chinese and we'd like to see some change in your political system, it's an attack on Chinese core interest. What can you do? It's a capital punishment crime. No wonder those who call for political change in China were put in jail. Easily understood. National unity, what does that mean? Does that include Taiwan? Does that include Tibet and the Uyghur area? Of course. Right? But the United States does not see eye to eye with China on this so-called national unity. So we will approach the Chinese and talk about different things, then it is an attack on their core interest on national unity. Territorial integrity, does that include the territorial dispute between China and Japan? Does that include South China Sea disputes? We have no idea. So when China asks for mutual respect for core interest, it's like putting the cart before the horse, right? For the United States, you can't go anywhere. But that's what China wants. China feels dearly. It is its core interest. It's not settled. Very difficult. And the Chinese put it this way, until China settles all this nation-building business, it cannot become a full-fledged great power. And Chinese think that United States has settled all these problems a long time ago, since Civil War and afterwards, so that the United States can go anywhere free of any of those burdens. And China cannot. So that's why they hold so dearly and want the United States to do so. So back to the incident here. When Chinese imposed these 80s over there, in addition to our diplomatic protest, we flew 2 B-50 bombers from Guam into that area and then come back. It's a challenge to the Chinese. We don't accept it. We will not recognize it. We will define you. That's all. We flew 2 B-52 bombers over there. The Chinese did not respond immediately. Some Chinese netizens make fun of it. They say, well, Chinese air pollution was so bad, they couldn't even see it. So by the time they learn about it from foreign sources. The B-52 bombers are already back to Guam. They only learned about it from outside sources. They couldn't see it. Oh, that's terrible. But then that incident took place just a little over a week before Vice President Biden's scheduled visit, long-planned visit to East Asia, Japan, Korea, and China. The Chinese knew that, and they were prepared. Okay? And they were prepared to deal with the US president when they have this thing. And then when they have the meeting in Beijing, 5.5-hour uncompromising meeting between the VP and the Chinese president. They simply will not roll it back for sure. And they will implement whatever they impose over there. It's a very uncompromising meeting between the two. Well, as I promised you, that I'm going to explain to you why. And I think I have come most of the way already. Now, back to the power transition theory here, is that this existing great power, as a mature power, kind of develop, just very small incremental, continue to develop, like the United States as a mature power. Annual growth rate is about 2%. But a rising power from initially very backward would experience an exponential growth here, rising rapidly. And if for some reason this rising power managed to surpass the existing great power, you know what's going to happen is that new international order will take place, made by this new one, okay? But then this is a very, very dangerous stage in the power transition. Either the existing great power preempt this rising power. Before you have a chance to challenge me, let me put you down. I just don't want you to change this international system. And that's what happened throughout history. Before the rising power had a chance, they started a war. Let's go to the battlefield and settle the difference. And then the rising power also have a logic that, well, before you preempt me, I might want to challenge you, gamble. When I have newfound power, I might have a chance to win. Let's fight. So this is the most uncertain stage. Now, China has entered this stage. U.S.-China relationship is at this stage. With China's rising in the last 30 years, we are now at this second stage of the power transition process. And the rising power is becoming more confident and feels it's ready to challenge the existing great power. The 80s is a perfect example to show China can impose one and can stand up to it. Okay, that's very interesting development. The Chinese may not even realize that. They may not even see that. My presentation will be equally educational to the Chinese. Yeah, I'm serious. Because Chinese leaders must know if they stick to the peaceful development, peaceful rise theory, they should be careful not to overplay its hand, to have a premature confrontation with its existing great power. While the United States is now opening its arms to welcome China's rise, hoping China to become a constructive great power, China should guard against its temptation as a rising power with newfound power and ready to challenge the great power and to do things in such a way. Very important for Chinese leaders to see that when they adopted an assertive foreign policy. So, to conclude, we look at the Asia Pacific here, and as I said, this lighted color, the continental shelf, okay? Very assertive, will ensure an environment for China's dream to be realized, economic development at home, pursue peace, but prepare for war. That's pretty threatening, because they see that in order to solidify its interest, maritime and disputed territory, they probably have to use force. So they say, we'll prepare for war. And then for the United States, all over the Asia Pacific, they think the United States is the only nation that has the capacity and perhaps the intention to frustrate China. So they prepare for that. And then Chinese used to say that they can be at odds with the United States, but not at war. But recently, with this new president's rhetoric, the Chinese are saying at odds with the United States, but not afraid of war. That is a game changer in the Chinese conversation, political discourse. I look at it as very threatening. Okay, so I agree to have this presentation taped and broadcast, so Chinese may get to it as well. So I put it this way: in my writing, I always keep U.S. and Chinese leaders in mind. When I write it for the leaders on both sides to see it. The same problem, it takes two to tango, take the two to cooperate and solve these problems. It's very, very important for Chinese leaders to watch out not to overstep on United States interest, and the United States leaders should be careful not to overreact to some of the Chinese premature, insophisticated moves. The two sides need to be careful. So thank you very much. I have not presented all, probably have not addressed all your questions, but thank you for your attention, and I would like to entertain your questions. Thank you.
They really needed to put one country together. I think the North looked at that. But what is going on with these disputed areas that you would just go to war over? Why can't they just trade with Taiwan or buy this stuff or what?
Determined to fight for those disputed territories in the East and South China Sea. That's kind of put it that way, right? Let me start with this. When it comes to a fight over territory, usually it defines reason, defines logic. Nations go to war just, that's the way it is. I just, think that is the way it is. Circular, okay? But for China in particular, then, I can somehow put it in perspective. When China was the most powerful nation in East Asia, for centuries. Its imperial reach expands everywhere. And then the most expensive one probably is this Chinese fleet under the General Zheng He in the Ming Dynasty in the 12th century AD. When the Chinese set sail all the way to Africa, to India, and they touch upon every places. The distance one, okay, they just like, wow, Newfoundland. But the closed ones, like South China Sea, East China Sea, and these places were Chinese periphery. And the Chinese have a mindset that wherever this imperial reach touches, it's theirs, back then. And also prior to these Chinese fleets sail, Chinese individuals, fishermen, merchants, or other people have long been those places already. And the Chinese, for the record, were the first to give names to almost all the rocks, the barren rocks in the South and East China Sea. And the current names, you know, the Spratlys and Paracels, whatever, those English names were new names, new English names of late, as part of the legacy of the Western colonialization, where the Chinese still name all these territories in Chinese characters. So the Chinese use those as evidence that they were the first to be there. And they thought that they owned them. They took it for granted. It was theirs. Okay? And in the old days, when the Middle Kingdom was powerful, those neighboring states have no intention and power to challenge the Middle Kingdom. And then there was no need either, because back then technology was backward. Nobody knows what to do with those barren rocks in South China Sea. So nobody even cared. And the Chinese did not even want to spend any resources to maintain them, to take effective control. But they just assumed, they take it for granted, it was theirs. Well, this great power fell from grace. Western power forced their way into China, and China was carved out, almost colonized into spheres of influences, okay? And as a result, and the most significant one is Japan's invasion of China and also spread into the entire Asia. Japan took over all of the East and South China Sea territories. So as a result of Japan's defeat in World War II, and then great power settlement, President Roosevelt, Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and Chinese President Chiang Kai-shek, they had a Cairo conference. Map out the world after the war, and then decided that Japan should renounce all its so-called stolen properties, territories from the Asian nations, put it that way. So the Chinese think that those who were Chinese properties, they were stolen, taken over from China when China was weak and was in disgrace. So it's only right and proper in the Chinese mind to recover them, to restore its sovereignty over them. Now, in Chinese own writing, they openly write it that way. Recovering South China Sea and East China Sea territory. Recovering. It's not seen in English literature. The Chinese literature is a recovering. Now, whether China can do so is an entirely different story. It depends on whether China has the capability to do so, whether it's willing to fight, jeopardize the economic development at this point, whether the Vietnamese will hand it over to Chinese. All depends. And whether China really want to challenge the United States to do so. Those are all unknown questions, unanswered questions. But in their mind, when they look at the territory, they think it's their territory, stolen by the other neighbors. It's only right for them to recover. So that explains why China looks so dearly and look at that as part of the so-called national unity, territorial integrity, put it in that broad perspective. Okay, very difficult. Yes, Mr. President.
A few years ago, China achieved one of the major goals they had of becoming a member of the WTO.
2001.
And they've complained about being a member ever since
Right.
because they're having problems with dealing with many of the requirements that are placed upon them.
Right.
To become the dominant nation, China must achieve that greater goal of economic superiority.
Right.
Can China achieve that without being a member of the Trans-Pacific Partnership and without fixing what's wrong with the WTO requirements that it's having trouble with?
Yeah, very, very good question. China joined the WTO with a lot of compromises. The Clinton administration really get China to concede on many things in order to become a member. And China, for so many years, worked so hard to become a member and want to become one because it can derive many benefits from it. But ever since China joining the World Trade Organization, this problem of China's compliance with the requirement has been a problem, as you rightly noted. Okay. At this point, I think it's, to be fair, it's about, I would say, 60, 70% fulfillment of Chinese compliance. The United States government, the Trade Office, the Treasury Department, keep bookkeeping records, closely monitor China's compliance issue. And you can find answers over there to see how well China has complied with it. It's not complete, but it's not complete fail either. So it's like a half full, half empty, that kind of story. But China continue to make excuses. It's a developing nation, it cannot do those changes one step at a time. So then the World Trade Organization has given China several kind of a grace period for China to eventually comply. And so in that sense, I don't know the exact number, and I think from my observation from time to time, it's not 100%, but it's getting close, making progress. So China actually have interest to fulfill its promises and become a great economic power in that sense too. It has an interest to comply with that and to finish that. Now then you mentioned the Trans-Pacific Partnership. This is a new thing in the making. Initially proposed by 4 small nations in Asia Pacific. And they were members of the APEC, the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Organization, Singapore, Brunei, and then New Zealand. And there is still another one, Malaysia, I think. They are upset with the APEC being like a talk shop for so long and could not really achieve its objective to promote a trans-Pacific free trade zone, the ultimate goal of this meeting. For over 10 years, it mostly talked. There has not been much very tangible actions taken. So those 4 nations proposed a trans-Pacific partnership and hoping to create a free trade zone and eventually to include all, put this in action. Small nations cannot make a big impact, so nobody even paid any attention. But then when the Obama administration launched the rebalance towards Asia, a main goal of that this rebalancing is to help the United States to regain its economic advantage. The president was looking for opportunities to re-energize U.S. economy. So then his advisors look at what is available in that area and found this Trans-Pacific Partnership a useful vehicle for the administration to pursue that goal. because this is going to be a very revolutionary idea. The TPP is practically going to dismantle all the trade barriers currently still exist among many of the members. They are World Trade Organization members. They still maintain some sort of barriers for certain items in trade, one of which is agriculture, very important. So then the Obama administration pick up this piece and think that we can use this piece to pursue our goal, to re-energize U.S. economy. Once the superpower becomes part of it, that whole thing takes a new lease of life. But then it just so happened that when the United States picked it up, we started talk with some potential partners. We just don't feel to include China at this point. And they immediately generate a problem. If you do not have China in this partnership, which is the second largest economy, the largest trading nation almost, the second largest trading nation in the world, if China is not in there, how can this TPP go anywhere? That becomes a problem. So immediately it becomes a political contest between China and the United States as well. So the Chinese reaction to it was very hostile in the first place. They thought it was a U.S. attempt to exclude China. So then it was a conflict between China and the United States. But then, just about these several years in its making, some of the problems started to come out. So the Chinese can now be at ease and just to sit back and see if the United States can make it anywhere at all. The most difficult problem now is between China, the United States and Japan. We want Japan to become part of it. And Japan's prime minister showed that he would sign on to this program. But the program will require Japan to dismantle its trade barrier for the agricultural product, which is very, very important to Japan. And Japan's domestic politics immediately come out and exploded. So Japanese farmers lobbied the Japanese diet to oppose his government because they think that if you allow U.S. agricultural products to move into Japan, it's practically going to wipe out Japan's agricultural sector for good. Japanese cannot take that. So they oppose this government initiative. So at this point, the negotiation is on hold. So the Chinese at this point will say, well, first of all, good luck if you can make it work. Second, you have to include me, but it actually is going to work. So then they have a second look. They're not opposing that at all at this point. So the Obama administration probably would will consider getting China into the negotiation as well. But is this going to be a successful case? It's going to probably replace the World Trade Organization because it's more revolutionary in many aspects. So many have doubts about this whole thing, whether the United States can make it work. Okay, thank you.
China doesn't have much of a cultural history of territorial expansion by military means. Mm-hmm. And so what would a war with the United States look like? What kind of a confrontation would be likely in such a case?
Yeah, very good question. Now, I earlier said that the Chinese believe those lost, disputed territory was stolen from them. From a strategic cultural perspective, it justifies the use of force. From the Chinese perspective, if you have a chance to study Chinese cultural traditions, strategic culture in particular, which deals with three important issues: the nature of war, why people fight against each other, why nations go to war, fundamental issue. Second, how to justify the use of force. Okay? And the third one is the conduct of war, art of war. 3 issues under this whole fuzzy idea of strategic culture. Now, in the United States and in the West, from the Western tradition, we have the biblical understanding of an imperfect human nature. Ever since Adam and Eve had this taste of the fruit of wisdom, they corrupted our perfect human nature, and then all descendants become fallible. We all make mistakes. We are all imperfect. The original sin problem make us all like so. We all want things. When we cannot get the things we want, we fight for it. Okay? That explains very well. Individuals fight. Nations go to war against each other for conflict of interest. But the Chinese tradition, there is no biblical influence whatsoever. Original sin is completely absent in the Chinese culture. Okay? All the Chinese cultural thing comes from Confucius. Confucius' teaching, he put it this way. When we are born, we are all the same. Like a piece of, a baby. We are all the same when we are all born, innocent. It is the social upbringing, your education, the environment that influence you, your parents' influence, set us apart. We are all born the same. It's the social upbringing set us apart. Confucius thinks that social relationship is the most fundamental important thing in human societies. When the society is in good order, father be the father, wife be the wife, husband be the husband, son be the son, ruler, subject, all observe their rules, society is in good order, there is peace. When the order is disrupted, there is war. Okay, that's the Confucius conception. It follows that. A government use force to restore order, to maintain order is legitimate. Legitimate, right? So, when the Chinese look at these neighboring states, whatever other foreign states, taking over what they think belong to them, it's a disruption of their order. It's justifiable for the Chinese to use force to do so. Whether China will do that is an entirely different set of story, depending on China's power, its interest, its agenda, its mission, its relationship with the United States. Many, many conditions will make the Chinese think many times whether they would wage a war on those territories or with the United States. But in their mind, it's justifiable. Same thing about Taiwan. China thinks that Taiwan used to be part of China, ceded to Japan as a war 120 years ago, they lost to Japan. Ceded that territory to Japan and should be returned to China as such. The United States promised standing away from Chinese perspective. So China is willing to use force against Taiwan because China thinks that is a sovereignty issue. What is a sovereign? Sovereign is a government having military power, effective control of a piece of territory and some people. Use of force for a sovereign power is legitimate. When the United States criticized China for refusing to abandon the use of force and the threat on Taiwan, the Chinese think you are hypocritical. So that's their position. So for the Chinese, at least in their mind, they are willing to go to war on Taiwan. And if the United States goes so far to fight, they are willing to deal with the United States. That's all. For us, I don't think our president can convince Americans to fight for those uninhabited islands, the Senkakus, to sacrifice our life over there. It's very difficult. For the Chinese, it's a different story. So at least in their mind, they have no problem accepting the proposition that they are willing to go to war. For Americans, it's very difficult. Our senior leaders, military especially, have made this comment many times, even in religious ways, that God forbids we go to China. We can't even take care of Iraq or Afghanistan. My Lord, China is much bigger and 1.5 billion people. That's no easy tasking. Okay, don't even think about it. So the Chinese also say it that way too. So hopefully we can avoid that. But the problem is that mentally we look at the issue in different ways. We may not look at the territorial dispute the Chinese look at it. They value it more. They hold it more dearly than us do. We can care less about those places, okay? But they care very much. So that's the discrepancy in our conception, in our view on those issues. Yeah.
Excellent presentation. Thank you, Dr. Lai. China's done an excellent job in managing its economic growth over the last several decades. But if there's an Achilles heel in their future progress, it would have seemed to be that the demographics, the internal demographics of the country, stemming from its one single-child policy, it now has a birth rate that's lower than a sustainable rate. Its population is aging at a very fast rate. How do you envision they're going to have to deal with that to still achieve their goals?
Yeah, good question. You touch on the right button. And actually, China has already taken a measure on this population problem. And the new president has just taken his from the Chinese Communist Party's convention. Every 5 years, the Communist Party have a major convention. They call it Party Congress. And it is a time for them to have modify their platform and then put some new things. And this year, there are several pretty significant changes out of this party convention. One of which is a population policy change. And then the party has taken the position, make the decision, the Chinese National People's Congress endorse it. It's now working on the details about how additional children can take place in Chinese families. So at this point, in a very general, broad sense, is that if one of the couples comes from a single-child family, this couple then can have two children in a family. Immediately there is a problem. What happens if they divorce? Can they still have another one? What happens if both couple come from single family? Can they have 4? They have no idea. So the Chinese People's Congress is now in session. It's about to be in session at this point. And they are going to work out the details. It's very difficult. But the point is that the Chinese have taken note of the consequences of the one-child policy, which was in effect since the early 80s. And it is generating a lot of social demographic problems as a result of that. So it's now taking steps trying to fix that problem. And I think the underlying assumption is that if they allow 2 children family, it will not generate a population explosion. Because if couples don't want to have children, is population decrease. If a couple just have 1, it's still decrease. 2 is a simple replacement. 3 then is a surplus. And more will then generate population explosion. So allowing 2 then could be acceptable. Hopefully in the long run, they can bring back the balance in Chinese population. How the Chinese can do that at this point is a big question. It's a big question. And with the Chinese become more mobile, divorce become more acceptable, and people having all different kind of lifestyle, very much like Americans, then it will be much more difficult for the Chinese government to control at this point. I don't know. Other questions? Yeah, one more question here.
If the Chinese economy were to go into depression,
Yeah.
would they be required to sell the American debt that they bought, the bonds?
Right. Now, that's a very interesting question.
Because that could affect
Right.
us.
See, at this point, the talk about this finance war between China and the United States is the following. What if we don't get along with China and they are upset and then they sell out their bonds? That's going to rock this economy here, right? Because it's very substantial. 1.3 trillion, a lot of money. But then, on the second look then, we feel a lot more comfortable than the Chinese for several reasons. First, the United States is the largest and most sophisticated financial market here. Japan has another one, Europe has another one. But comparing to the United States, they are minimal. Okay? So if China were to sell, and then you have to have buyers. Who is going to buy those bonds from China? You have to come from Japan or Europe. And they don't have the money to do so. They don't have the market to absorb what the Chinese are going to throw out. Chinese have no choice but stick to our market here. That's very depressing to the Chinese. Very depressing. Yeah, seriously. Chinese doesn't have an internal market at this point as well to take advantage of that. Yeah, you asked the question during the break, where does China get all this money from to purchase the U.S. Treasury bonds? The money comes from Chinese expensive trade. They have earned a lot of foreign currency. China runs surplus against every other nation in the world. So it earned a lot of foreign currency, US dollars, out of this trade. China doesn't have a financial market to take advantage of the money. The best place for China to make use of that money is to come here to purchase U.S. Treasury bonds or invest in U.S. Economy, purchase U.S. real estate, which is going on now, or purchase U.S. operation. One took place in Ohio recently, a Chinese firm coming in to purchase a manufacturer abandoned by GM to produce car windshields, and the Chinese are going to bring that business back to life. That's an investment. That's how they want to use this money. Otherwise, that money will lay waste in China. So the best thing for China is to turn around to purchase U.S. Treasury, the most secure and interest profit making. So China has done that. And over time, every year, on average, China purchased about 150 billion US dollar of Treasury bonds from the United States. So that help us, the housing market, the financial market, continue to go. So China cannot sell that. There's no other place for China to do so. No buyers if China decided tomorrow to do so. They're simply impossible. So then it's more concern on the Chinese side then, is that what happens if the two nations don't get along and the United States freezes Chinese assets here or refuse to pay the debt? We just declare default. We are poor, we have no money. I don't want to pay it back. That has happened in many other countries many times. Think about it, back in the 80s, almost all of the South American countries, Latin American countries, were in huge debt, inflation. Many of them simply declared default, couldn't pay back interest or principal. So other nations eventually would have to say, we just let go of it. So when the United States, the government shut down, that problem was so poor, some people actually jokingly said, we can just call it default and refuse to pay the Chinese whatsoever. So the Chinese are a lot more concerned about these assets in the United States. So when we talk about the finance war, China has more to lose in that sense. So Chinese former prime minister used to say he couldn't go to bed at ease every night because he take the American saying too hard. When you owe me $100, it's your problem. When you owe me $1 million, it's my problem. When the United States having that much money from China, then he could not go to bed at ease every time. He just afraid that the United States economy will continue to go down the drain, and then somehow just say, we're not going to pay it back. We go broke. Thank you. You're welcome. One question from Ken. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I've heard that the thinking by the Taiwanese is shifting toward reunification, that they're starting to see that as more positive. Is that true? And if they are, would the reasons be economic?
Yeah. It is taking place in a very significant way as we're talking about it now, because the Mainland Affairs Council's chairman visited China and had a phenomenal welcome visit all over China. A big handshake between Taiwan's Mainland Affairs Council's chair and the Chinese counterpart. And the two of them were trying to prepare for some way to have a meeting between the Chinese president and the Taiwan president. At this point, there's talk, and they try to work out a way to avoid the two China problem and how the two can meet. Okay, it's getting pretty close. Now that said, then Taiwan's situation is the following. There are some pro-independent people, politicians and people. They just simply don't want to be part of China. They want an independent, de facto as well as de jure, legal, independent Taiwan nation, whatsoever. And then there is a sizable part of Taiwan people then want eventual unification. Most of these people come from mainland China, either as a result of the Chinese Civil War or as a result of long centuries of immigration. They have roots in China. They want eventual unification with mainland China. But then they don't want to reunite with mainland China as it is now, because that is still an authoritarian government. Democracy is still at this point off limit. And Taiwan is a thriving democracy. Why give up this treasure for something worse than that? So then, outright independence would mean war with the mainland. And then with the involvement of the United States, unification at this point does not look very good either. So then, most of the Taiwan people stay in the middle, maintain the status quo, promote relationship, cooperation, have the leaders talk so that they don't go to war against each other. But there's no hastened unification to take place. Wait until the other part is much more peaceful, democratic, and acceptable, then there will be a peaceful reunion. So most of the people hold that position. And then through our repeated, consistent public opinion poll in the last 30 years, Taiwan's opinion poll has such a very stable distribution. On the two extremes, independent and unification, most of the people stay in the middle. That's the thing. So it's good to see the leaders talk, shake hands, and promote economic integration. But unification, don't do it in a hurry. Okay. Yes.
Since I'm one of your students, please excuse me if I ask a question that helps me on my research paper.
Several more months.
Yeah, a paper that I owe you. So China has cautioned the U.S. that the military component of the U.S. rebalance to Asia complicates the regional security environment. Part of this concern stems from the belief of many Chinese that the military component of the rebalance targets China and that the U.S. wants to contain China. So the power transition theory that you explained stated that dissatisfaction is a key motivator for conflict between the rising power and the dominant power. It appears that the Chinese concern with their U.S. rebalance is tied to their dissatisfaction with the U.S.-led international world order, where U.S. military presence has been the primary guarantor of Asian peace and stability for decades. So the question is, what is your opinion of how effective the current U.S. strategy will be in avoiding a potential conflict during this dangerous transition period? Do you have any recommendations to adjust the U.S. strategy, if necessary?
Yeah, very, very good. My hold on the Obama's administration's rebalancing towards Asia Pacific is this. I think it's the right thing to do. With China becoming such a growing power, Asia Pacific becoming such a powerhouse, it just makes sense for the United States not just being part of it, but take leadership of it. We turn our attention to this area is the right thing to do. However, doing the right thing does not mean you can do it right. That's my take on it. So our policy implementation somehow appear to be either too heavy-handed or misunderstood, in good part by our Asian partners and in a good part by the Chinese. Okay, and it also can happen that we unintentionally make it appear so. For instance, our officials have come out right from the beginning and repeated throughout these last 4 or 5 years to tell the Chinese and Asia Pacific nations this rebalancing is not about China, it's not against China. It is for the good of the Asia Pacific. But what in essence, what this rebalancing has done, simply just cannot convince the Chinese. So the Chinese have kept telling the United States, you are protesting too much. If not against me, who else? No other nation in this area deserves that kind of credit, okay? To have the entire United States rebalancing and promising having 60% of the United States military power to station in Asia Pacific. What for? The Chinese say, no matter what you say, you cannot convince me. So that's one thing. The other then is this policy is active and in some sense very aggressive, at least posturing to engage the allies and partners. That upset the Chinese. And then specifically with respect to the Philippines and to a lesser extent Japan that have territorial disputes with China, then it is where the sticking problem comes up. Philippines is a much, much weaker nation, simply cannot stand up to China. It just makes sense the United States support this disadvantaged, the underdog. Philippines certainly try utmost to take advantage of its ally treaty relationship with the United States, would make U.S. rebalancing in every way to support Philippines' fight for its territory in the South China Sea. And our politicians and our officials also sometimes, I don't blame them. When you are in your host nation, you have to please your host. And we say things that unintentionally encourage or at least put in the Philippine government or those people who want to fight in their mind an elusive United States commitment to support them, to fight for China over those territories. That creates a very dangerous disconnect here. Before I go to the disconnect, let me give you this example. We call it South China Sea, but the Vietnamese call it East Sea because it's to the east of Vietnam. There's no reason I should call it South China Sea. Why? Why China Sea, right? The Philippines say South China Sea is to my west. At least to the part close to me, it should be Western Philippine Sea. It should not be South China Sea, right? Now, they are not alone. Between Japan and South Korea, there is a Sea of Japan. But South Korea said, why should be the Sea of Japan where I have a part of it? So South Korea called it East Sea. So even for our US officers, when you are in Japan, you can see the Sea of Japan. When you are in South Korea, you better not. That's a forbidden word. So when the Philippines call that part of the South China Sea West Philippine Sea, interesting. If Haiti's president say, I endorse that, nobody care, right? The poorest nation in the world. But when Secretary Hillary Clinton went to Philippines, standing on top of a US battleship, okay, Fitzgerald destroyer, echoing the same term, this is the West Philippine Sea. That has a lot of significance coming from the superpowers Secretary of State, endorsing that idea. No wonder it made the people in Beijing jumping up and down. Right? And Philippine government officials, its foreign minister in particular, take good note of it. On this particular day, Secretary so-and-so make this comment, endorsing my claim. Very significant. And he has a list over the last 20 years. Every U.S. senior official make a comment about U.S. commitment to the defense of Philippines. They have that in record. They will hold U.S. government accountable. So when they come to a fight with China, then they would ask the United States. They expect the United States to support them. Now here comes the dangerous disconnect. With the Philippines believing the United States coming to its support, okay, they would challenge the Chinese and fight for the territories. The Chinese, on the other hand, think the United States only want to make some trouble for China. It doesn't really mean to fight for them. So then the Chinese say, yeah, you believe that, you're in your dream. Americans will never come to fight for you. So the Chinese then decided to get tough with the Philippines. Okay? So then the expected American intervention may or may not come. But the two sides started to challenge each other. One believes Americans' intervention, the other believes American intervention not. So that creates a big problem between China and the Philippines. To a lesser extent, the Chinese are also trying to figure out whether the United States will come to Japan's rescue if they come to a fight with Japan. Fortunately, our officials make it very clear that our treaty relationship obligation to Japan is very clear. And we want China and Japan to settle their dispute in peaceful way. And Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, General Dempsey, put it very straightforwardly in Beijing, that don't fight. If you do, we have to be there. Very clear. Don't force our hand. Very big, very clear. So this kind of interaction, somehow, maybe unintended, have generated this problem that our military rebalance towards Asia Pacific have created this misconception, either misread by our allies and friends of our intention, and created a false expectation, and also put the Chinese in guessing what they can do. In some sense, have created more tension. So that certainly is one. Chinese writing also claim that why does the United States want to engage all these allies and partners and leaving me alone? If not for me, for who else? So all of this, the Chinese, at least in rhetoric, turn its pointed finger at the United States. So those are the problem. Now, the Philippine problem is not ending. Our naval chief, the CNO of Navy, recently was visiting the Philippines. And he, in Philippines, you have to please your host, of course. So he said, well, the United States support to Philippines is sincere. Well, the Filipinos take it very, very dearly. Now, the trick is here. The United States and Philippines had a mutual defense treaty signed back in 1951. But the Filipino territorial dispute came along in 1972, 20 years after. So then, if China and the Philippines were to have a fight over those disputed territory, should the mutual defense treaty cover? The United States does not want to make that commitment. However, the treaty says that our commitment is to Filipino military and official objects, like their vessels, military vessels. And if they have conflict, if they were attacked in the Pacific, the United States will come to their defense. Now, here is the area subject to interpretation. So if a Philippine Navy ship, a battleship, get in a fight with a Chinese battleship over the disputed territory, the United States will find itself in a very difficult situation. On the one hand, on one side of our mouth, we say, our treaty will not cover that territory. But on the other side of our mouth is that it covers your official vehicle. When that official vehicle is in a fight with China, then we'll come to your rescue. So the Filipino knows very well, then that's fine. We have US support. See, that's a very difficult situation over there then, okay? There are lots of these fuzzy area. So that make this rebalancing, especially the military part of it. So finally, long answer to your question is this. I also strongly hold that we overemphasize the engagement with the partners and the allies and the recruiting partners. It is good we do that. We do that all the time. But in this high soundbite Obama campaign to rebalance towards Asia Pacific, we overplay that. We overemphasize that part. While we have not made engaging Chinese military at least as high soundbite as that one. So my challenge to our leadership is that if we engage the Chinese military well, our engagement with the allies and partners would be supplementary. But if we do not engage the Chinese military well, continue to work on warplanes against each other, preparing for war against each other, no matter how much we engage our allies and partners, it's not enough. I said this to the AUSA conference. General Sullivan invited me to give a keynote speech in Hawaii. I submitted to the floor. I said, that is my proposition. You must make engaging Chinese military the centerpiece of our engagement with China. When we do it, that one well, right, and do it right, we will have a peaceful world. As I'm seeing, Colonel Fu also knows very well. After many years of making, we are finally going to have a Chinese Academy of Military Science, very high-level delegation to come to the War College next month. And we hope to create a good discussion, not just high official General Odiano in Beijing have a handshake, not just kind of superficial. We want to promote a very deep understanding through this exchange. So we are having one next month to the War College, the first one of its kind. More than 2 years in its making, very difficult. Almost like a dating process, on and off, on and off. And finally, it is going to take place. So hopefully that will become one of these engagement process and promote a good understanding on the two parts and to prevent war. Thank you very much.